Welcome back, my amazing listeners, and welcome to 2018. It is a new year which allows us a new era for our minds, our lives, and our spirits to breathe, to enlighten, to grow, and to allow ourselves pause on a better path. As past guests have often posited, and my pals Christina Hutchinson and Corinne Fisher most shamelessly and poignantly queried, what is this show all about? Well, it is a platform, not only for entertainment, but for change. Through change, we endeavor to grow, and in growth, we find joy. In this very first episode of 2018, I welcome a pioneering advocate for change in Josh Silver, who is the founder and director of an organization called Represent.us, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization whose mission is to challenge the influence of money in American politics. He is also the former CEO and president of Free Press, an activist group that promotes internet openness. We speak on net neutrality, corporate control, and the means to release ourselves from the ever-present environment of corporate corruption. After speaking with Josh and making my voice known to him, I have been very graciously invited to represent this show as a correspondent to cover the inaugural Unrig the System Summit, the first week of February in New Orleans. There, advocacy leaders, academics, comedians, musicians, celebrities, activists, philanthropists, and journalists from all over the world will convene to work together on unthreading the blanket of corruption that is currently suffocating this nation. Speakers include Sarah Bonk, the co-founder of Disrupt DC, Ron Guerin, chief pilot at Worldview and former NASA astronaut, actress Jennifer Lawrence, filmmaker and producer Adam McKay, and of course, today's guest, Josh Silver himself. I myself have often pondered that our world revolves in the nature of a plutocracy above all other political and governmental values. We as a people seem to be forever bound to a system that spins on a nature of greed, on which we must run like a hamster on a wheel to survive. We must cut this net if we wish to swim in waters of true freedom. To that, let's get to the show. I very proudly welcome Josh Silver.
This is the Jabberjaw Podcast Network.
Josh, welcome to Friend or Foe.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, Josh, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in both organizations.
Well, situation in American politics where it feels sort of bizarre, right? Like government is super gridlocked, dysfunctional, makes irrational decisions. There's all this polarization where people are sort of Democrats against Republicans, when in reality, almost half of Americans aren't even members of either major party. And we are failing to make progress on all of the issues that your listeners actually care about, whether it's poverty or climate change or healthcare, efficient government. We're in a really tough spot. And when you actually look at what's causing these problems, at the end of the day, it's because the system itself, the government itself, the way that candidates run for office, the way that we Americans vote for those candidates, and the way that politicians run and govern once in office, it's all broken. It's corrupt. And until we fix those systems, we're going to continue to sort of be on this mouse wheel, this perpetual Groundhog Day, and things will get worse and worse.
Absolutely agreed. I was watching a video from your organization partner, Mansur Gidfar, and he spoke quite eloquently in the video in saying that corruption is legal in America. I found that very compelling, and as most of us are feeling, quite upsetting, because that's really what's been going on for quite some time.
Yeah, and I mean, what's been really cool about this last about 2 years, a little under 2 years. It started with Adam McKay, right, who got the Oscar for The Big Short and did all those great Will
Hmm.
Ferrell movies. And he joined us, and he was like, this. I think it was coming out of The Big Short. He was just like, this is the issue. This is the fulcrum. Like if we win on this issue, we can win anything. This is the key. And then after Adam, then David O. Russell,
Right.
the director, and then Jennifer Lawrence, and then it started to snowball. Those three joined our board of directors and remain there and are very active. Then Jack Black, Kerry Washington, Spike Jones, Ed Helms, J.J. Abrams, Sia, Elizabeth Banks, Orlando Bloom. They've all joined our creative council and are actually leaning in and doing stuff, not just lending their name, but are doing stuff. So it's been pretty cool to see that Hollywood and the sort of pop culture is starting to finally have their light bulb moment and realize that no matter how much we tell people to get out to vote or how much we tell people to support this or that law, the reality is until we enact campaign finance reform and change how we vote and end gerrymandering or the carving up of congressional districts so that they're not competitive, until we fix these kind of wonky, sort of unsexy things, we're just going to keep struggling to make progress.
Yeah, it's been a long, hard road, and in our current political environment with Mr. Orange here at the wheel, it's just it's gotten to be like a giant ball pit of nightmares, honestly.
Ball pit, that's new. I haven't heard ball pit.
Well, it's like it's like a giant circus of irrational, irreconcilable differences. It's
Yeah.
really gross. It's
But
really gross.
what's really important, I know my 6-year-old daughter pulled out a husk of corn, fresh corn, and it had that sort of yellow hair or fur on it, and she was like, Donald Trump. But this is the thing, though. It's really important. We're stuck in this bad pattern where it's like, if you beat up on Donald Trump, well, then you must be a Democrat, right? And you saw Democrats good, Republicans bad. The reality is once you actually spend time in Washington, D.C. or state houses, you see that the two major parties are compromised by big money and by the corrupt system and by trying to protect the status quo. Both of them, maybe not equally, but both of them. And so it's really important that people stop getting into this right versus left, us versus them. This is kind of a tribal thing. Humans have been doing it for thousands or millions of years, and recognize that the entire system is broken. And what's cool about these issues about fixing our corrupt political system is that actually grassroots, not the leadership, but grassroots conservatives and moderates and progressives are all unified in support of really sweeping reforms that would actually fix the system. And when you realize that, it's actually pretty empowering. You actually realize that we have a majority of people who want to truly unrig the system and make it work for everybody. That gives me hope.
As it does me, and a lot of my listeners out there. I mean, we really all want to come together, and when it comes down to the bare bones of it, we all want to protect our freedoms. We all want to be able to propel ourselves to live our dreams, and not just the American dream, but to be able to lead a life for ourselves that's positive, uplifting, and free of being controlled by corporate greed. But it seems to be that our corporate greed is more our national policy than anything.
Yeah. Well, and then it just got worse, right? You literally just had this tax bill, which essentially takes a country where income inequality, the distribution of wealth is more extreme than it has been since the 1890s, since the sort of robber baron era. And they just basically handed out 62% of the benefits of this tax bill go to the top 1%. And I believe it's the 41% of the benefits go to the top 0.1%. So, this is like, this is the evisceration of the middle class in America. And, the reality is you have to understand that, this is in this case the Republicans. But the problem is when the Democrats are in power, they talk a big game, but at the end of the day, more often than not, every debate in Washington, D.C. ends up being truly a debate between the two moneyed interests. It's the internet companies against the phone companies. It's the insurance companies against the pharmaceutical companies. It's the oil and gas companies against the nuclear and the other energy companies. So it's like the public interest is scarcely even considered. And it's time for us to all sort of stop, drop, and roll and recognize that this is the issue of our time, unrigging the American political system, as unsexy as it is. Because, I mean, Devlin, when I'm like talking to my wife about gerrymandering or ranked choice voting and open primaries, these are things that would actually fix it. She literally falls asleep, like right. Literally. And it's not ice. It's not polar bears floating on little tiny icebergs. It's not. It's not starving babies. It's like, those are images that really can really resonate with people because they're obvious. It's reptilian, but it's a challenge. Everybody listening to this show, like, you got to actually check this stuff out and recognize that this is the key. This is what we've been missing. This is why we have a reality show star as president. This is why. Even Barack Obama, who talked a big game about campaign finance reform and fixing the rigged system, even for the first 2 years of his presidency, when he had majorities of Democrats in the House and Senate, didn't do anything on this. It's why well-intentioned politicians and poor-intentioned politicians alike really fail to move the needle and exert political capital to change this stuff. The people who are going to change it are the people themselves. We, the people, are going to have to take this fight on and force it through.
So, Josh, how do you believe each of us individually, not being one of the powerful voices that you have, like Adam McKay or Jennifer, how can me, Mr. Joe Schmo, with this podcast, help to change the political climate?
Well, first of all, recognize that, that there's that expression, those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. There's been a lot of movements in our nation's history that started by trying to change federal policy, failed, and then instead took the fight local, took the fight to the state and local level. So, for example, interracial marriage, that was a fight that started in 1797. It took 180 years for it to become federally legal in 1967, believe it not that long ago. But they started at the state level. And they won with just like a couple of states. And then at one point they went 50 years without winning any other states. And then they won a few more. And they kept fighting until it became federal law. Same with prohibition. Same with women's suffrage, women's right to vote, abortion, same-sex marriage, marijuana. All these issues that were going nowhere in the federal system. And instead, the proponents took the fight local. And they started winning at the state level and at the city level. And when they got enough states under their belts, they kind of hit a trigger point. And it was because of this grassroots movement, enough victories at the local level and or a court case in their favor triggered federal reform. And that's what we're doing at Represent Us, which is represent.us, which is everybody, along with Jennifer Lawrence and Adam McKay, are basically leaning in on changing the law, passing so-called anti-corruption laws, which you can see at anticorruptionact.org, and changing how we run and how we vote and how politicians govern. And that is the key to it. It's one city and one county and one state at a time.
That's really quite a powerful message, and one that we have to keep striving for.
Devlin, you sound kind of like almost defeated.
No, not at all, buddy. I need a nap. No, actually, I'm quite excited. I'm really excited to have you on this program. To be quite honest with
thanks.
you, this is not the usual skew of friend or foe. Usually, it's kind of a zany poppy kind of show.
But but the thing is I kind of jest, but the reality is, even if you're just tired and not down, the reality is most of your listeners, when it comes to politics, they are down, and with good reason, right? It feels pretty dystopian right now. To be clear, full disclosure, I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I'm totally fed up with both parties. I'm an independent. And I'm just blown away by what's happening. I mean, what's happening right now with Donald Trump and his complete abdication of anything public interest minded, the way he's basically just putting the interests of bankers and billionaires ahead of regular middle class people, is really depressing. And most people feel like it's hopeless, that there is nothing you can do. But the reality is you can. And in our nation's history, as I mentioned, people have taken matters into their own hands many times. The most recent ones, I think, that's most relevant to your audience that people are really recognize, that's gay marriage and marijuana decriminalization or legalization. And I always say, most of your listeners probably don't care. They're cool with that. But
except that I do, because I happen to be proudly bi. So,
well, there you go. But but regardless of your view of those issues, as a matter of political strategy, they took the fight local and they won. We actually won back in 2014 in the city of Tallahassee, Florida. That was our test case. Then we went out and with a coalition of groups won in the state of Maine and in the city of Seattle. Comprehensive campaign finance and ethics laws. We went out again in 2016 and won the most comprehensive anti-corruption law ever passed via ballot initiative. And most of our reforms are done via ballot initiatives, where you vote yes on question 2 or what have you. And then 2 months later, the South Dakota legislature, this is the 4th most corrupt state in America, where it's perfectly legal to give secret unlimited gifts to politicians in the state of South Dakota. 2 months after we passed the Anti-Corruption Act, which was really common sense stuff, like you can't do that. You can't give a secret unlimited gift to a politician, and you can't, you can't give huge contributions to politicians, and everything's disclosed, so there's no secret money in politics. There's a new ethics commission because that state is one of the very few that don't have one. And a couple months after passage of this great act, the legislature and the governor repealed it. They repealed the law outright. They just took it, wiped it out right off the books and said, sorry, voters, I know you want it, but we don't, which is completely appalling and part of a larger trend of state legislatures repealing laws passed by ballot initiatives, which happened a lot last year. But what's cool is the people of South Dakota, working with us at represent.us, went out and got a bunch of signatures and actually got a constitutional amendment where we amend the state constitution through a ballot initiative. We got the signatures, just submitted it, and we're going to the ballot in November of next year to pass an amendment for the Anti-Corruption Act that the legislature and the governor can't touch. They can't meddle with it. They can't repeal it. And now starts this epic battle over the next few months where the South Dakota legislature is going to try to kill us in the cradle and never let this thing get to the ballot. And it's like one of the biggest stories that's not being told about this fight for the heart of our democracy in South Dakota.
Well, it is being told because thankfully you are on the show, and I will promote the hell out of it because that's what I do.
That's great. That's great.
Speaking of things that keep getting taken out of our hands, let's talk about net neutrality. Boy, oh boy, yeah, is the right.
Do you want me to give the sort of what net neutrality 101?
Yes, please.
Okay, so here's the thing. This is a cool issue. It's depressing because we just had a big setback. But here's the thing. Net neutrality is a boring word, or 2 words, that describe how the internet works. And the internet, of course, started in the 60s or 70s, depending who you talk to. And ever since the very beginning of time, net neutrality is the principle that guides the internet. And all it means is that everything that's similar, so all emails move across the internet at the same speed, right? And that means that the company that delivers that internet into your business or to your house, whether it's Time Warner or Comcast or Verizon, they can't indiscriminately slow it down. They can't throttle it. For example, if Comcast delivers your internet, they can't say, okay, you know what, we're going to slow down Netflix videos and we're going to have Comcast videos go faster. That's illegal because you're breaking net neutrality. It creates an unfair competitive advantage. And so everything that's the same, voice over internet or emails or websites, they all move at the same speed. It's always been that way, always, and then in 2015, Barack Obama took an extra step, and I won't get into the details, but codified net neutrality officially as an ironclad law that can't be messed with. Up until then, it was in a little bit of a wishy-washy regulatory state. So right now, what happened is the Donald Trump Federal Communications Commission, run by a former lobbyist for Verizon, Ajit Pai, wiped out net neutrality and said, nope, no more. It's not happening. 3-2 Republican vote in the FCC. And net neutrality is no longer. And now these companies have the full right to be able to turn the internet into cable TV, where they create packages, they decide what's on, how much it costs, they choose winners and losers. It makes it so that upstart companies that want to try to compete on video or voice, they can't do it because the big guys are going to have the advantage because they can pay for premium speeds and service. This is super depressing because it's the fundamental it's the end of the internet as we know it. And so before I tell you what's next and why you shouldn't get too bummed out, because there's actually some hope, I will tell you that I used to run this, as you mentioned at the outset of the show, an organization called Free Press, which was at the time, 10 years ago, the leading organization, or certainly one of them, on this issue of net neutrality. It was a moment when this issue was being debated hot. It was like 10 years ago. It was a big deal. And I saw a day when 76 Democratic U.S. House members signed a letter to the then head of the Federal Communications Commission, telling them to loosen and weaken net neutrality laws. And that was because they were getting all this money from the cable and phone companies, which is they're one of the largest spenders in D.C. And that was the moment when I said, I've got to get into this money and politics space and to democracy, because this is ridiculous. All the Republicans were against net neutrality. This huge number of Democratic congressmen were now against it. And it was all because of the undue influence of these deep-pocketed cable and telephone lobbyists in Washington, D.C., who have their way. In the same way that something between 5,000 and 6,000 corporate lobbyists had their way with the tax bill that just passed. So net neutrality is on the ropes, but there is cause for hope. There's a chance that a court case will reverse this bad decision, because the rule at the Federal Communications was poorly written. And it is also possible that Congress could actually reverse it, because there is a small group of Republican politicians in Washington who actually understand the danger of this and are on the side of good on this. So it's not over yet, and this is going to be in court, and it's going to take a while. It's also going to take a while before these companies start to really mess with your internet. It's been cool to see young people paying attention to this, and a huge uprising happened over the past 6 months where they saw more people writing to Congress about net neutrality than the tax bill. So there's hope. Devlin, don't be down about net neutrality, but it is yet another example of how a broken democracy ends up with broken results in policy.
But as you mentioned, there is a lot of hope. You, as Represent.us and many other organizations, are already preparing their swords and shields to sue the crap out of the FCC.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as I was reading, although technically, currently, the net neutrality rules are still in effect, It's the Restoring Internet Freedom Order going into effect that that we are fearing. Yes.
Yeah, and what's so frustrating is that when you hear the bad guys talk about it, they talk about net neutrality as this unfair government regulation. That's how they always talk about it. So, I mean, it's kind of stunning the way our elected leaders and politicians, they just lie constantly. And of course, it's always kind of a faux pas to call it a lie, right? You're starting to see it more with Donald Trump, where major media are starting to finally say, just call it what it is, which are lies. But it's the opposite. I mean, net neutrality is just simply a regulation that regulates the biggest companies that are delivering the internet into your house and says you can't just mess with people's internet to create an unfair competitive advantage. That's all net neutrality is. It has nothing to do with government taking over the internet. It has to do with government protecting ordinary people from being ripped off. Now, if you're listening to this show and you're particularly into it and you think, God, this is a really important issue, on February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in New Orleans, we are hosting the first really big conference on the future of democracy. It's called Unrig the System. It's got some of the people we mentioned are coming, like Jennifer Lawrence, Adam McKay, David O. Russell, Jen Kwieger from the Young Turks, Steve Hilton from Fox News, right? So it's like this right-left thing. Richard Painter, who was the former ethics lawyer for George W. Bush, Lawrence Lessig from Harvard, and this long list of amazing people talking about every kind of thing about democracy, but also a bunch of comedians who we haven't announced yet. It's one of the most fun cities. I think it's the most fun city in America. It's on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's unrigsummit.com. It's not expensive to register, unrigsummit.com. If you're into this stuff, join us. I'll be there, and it's going to be an amazing time. Probably about 2,000 people in NOLA for the Big Easy to sort of take on democracy and open up the next chapter in this fight.
That's really incredible.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention to you, if you were aware of the false comments that were coming in on the online public comment function for in reaction to the FCC. There's a website called badcomments.attorneygeneral.gov in which actually a lot of my friends are listed there as making comments that they didn't actually make. Have you heard about this?
No, it was incredible. And it was basically what they found were that there were literally thousands, even hundreds of thousands of fake comments to the Federal Communications Commission. Because remember, I mean, Devlin, you've got millions of real people who are saying, like, don't end the internet as we know it, right? Don't do this. And then on the side of the cable and phone companies, there's nobody. Like, literally, who is going to say, oh, yeah, let's remove the law that protects me from the largest internet companies from, rapaciously price gouging and picking winners and losers on the internet for the first time since the internet was invented. Nobody's going to do that. And so what happened were there was these bots, right? I mean, there was like a story about how in late May of this year, hundreds of thousands of public comments poured into the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, hundreds of thousands more in June, and they weren't the voice of pro net neutrality Americans. They were the people who were ostensibly anti, and they turned out to be fake people. They were your friends and other people whose names were stolen and who were basically bots, were pretending to be real people, because after all, there is nobody in the country who supports ending net neutrality.
It's absolutely unbelievable. and thankfully my name wasn't on there. I checked, but a lot of my peers, a lot of people I know and am close to, they were listed on there. It's unbelievable.
But it was more than a million.
Keeps happening,
Yeah, more than a million of the 22 million comments to the FCC. And more than a million of them were these fake ones. Here's the good news. The New York Attorney General is currently investigating this, Eric Schneiderman, which is really cool because I think there may be justice served on this one. But this is business as usual. I mean, we're just seeing the government, it's just the Republicans right now are just giving away the store. I mean, they literally, Paul Ryan just said, I just did this $1.4 trillion tax breaks for billionaires and millionaires, and now we need to cut Medicare and Social Security. I mean, this is just one thing after another where the plutocrats who run government, who buy the politicians, they are systematically dismantling civil society in America.
So we really all have to bond together to continue to write our representatives and pop this acidic bubble that they've put around America.
Yeah, but also not just write, because writing doesn't do as much as we'd like. I mean, it's a good thing to do. It's easy. It's an armchair action. But you also need to go to represent.us on the web and become part of this movement to actually fix the system from the ground up, because that's how we're going to actually do it. That's why the folks in Hollywood are jumping in on this with both feet, is because they get that, like, we can't keep doing what we used to do. We can't just write letters. We can't just keep working on climate change or the tax reform or whatever. We have to actually get to the root of the problem. And it can't be about, it's, those bad Republicans, the Democrats will save the day. Guess what? The Democrats are not going to save the day. They're certainly on social issues better than Republicans, in my view. But that's on a lot of these economic issues, when it really matters, when it's time for Democrats to exert the political capital to actually do this stuff, to actually enact campaign finance reform, to actually protect net neutrality. Remember, 76 Democrats opposed it. When it comes to actually changing voting systems so that we could have systems that actually encourage third party and independent candidates to be able to run and win, they're going to sit on their hands and they're going to protect the status quo, because the status quo delivered power to them. They're sitting politicians after all. And that's why we have to fix it ourselves at the city and state level.
Absolutely. Wow. I'm just, it's just so unbelievable that everything has been unthreaded in such a way. I'm really uplifted, and it's quite exciting that that represent.us and the Free Press are continuing to help make waves.
Yeah,
across the
but I think,
spectrum.
And Devlin, I think there's no coincidence that you asked me about net neutrality, because
of course
the reality
it's maddening.
But it's maddening. But it's the other side of the same coin. And you might have not even realized that in terms of in thinking of it this way. But the structural issues that support American democracy or don't are media and the American people's ability to learn about the world and make informed decisions as part of a functional society, and a democracy where the elected officials actually support the public interest. It's an informed public and politicians who actually represent us. These are the two great structural issues of our time, and these are the two issues that have been historically ignored and have gotten us into this place that we're in today.
Josh, I'd like to find out a little bit about you personally. I know your mother was an essayist, a poet, creative writing teacher, and your father was a clinical psychologist. How did you find your way into what you're doing now? How did it generate in your mind?
Well, it's interesting, Devlin. My story is pretty stunning in that it really started back in 1995. I was 26 years old, and I built a raft on the Amazon River in Peru. And I was with one of my best friends. It was a 15-foot by 15-foot raft, and we decided we put about 3 months worth of food on it. And we decided to float this river and try to make it deep into the Amazon on this epic adventure. And 4 days into our trip, we were ambushed by locals. And my friend was shot and killed, and I was shot and left for dead. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you Google Josh Silver in Peru, you'll see some really excellent articles about it. And I came back feeling like, obviously I made it. It took me a week to get out of there, but I came back and I was like, what is life about? Like, life is certainly short, and I want to do something. I'm not going to be here on the planet long, so I want to do something that has meaning. And that decision was what led me to these issues of media and of democracy, and realizing that if you really want to have impact, if you really want to make the world a better place for the have-nots, for the afflicted, for those who are, as they say, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, well, then you have to take on these weedy, difficult issues like democracy, and that's been the driving force in my. So that's the long story, but I think we all have our story in terms of most of us, as we get older, we find moments where we confront death, we lose somebody we love, and you realize that life is precious, time is short, and that is really what drives this strategy. Even though it's a long-term strategy to fix our democracy, at the end of the day, it is the strategy that will actually reveal the kind of results that are needed in order to have a country that we're proud of again. I mean, everyone listening to your show wants to be proud of this American experiment, which in so many ways is still a beautiful country, but is in decline.
Man, what an incredible origin story that brought you to where you are. I'm fighting against big tobacco, as my mother is a cancer survivor. She had throat cancer a number of years ago, and it returned several months ago. And it's quite terrifying at how large a hold, big tobacco and other companies of that capacity have over us. My mom is such a fighter and so strong, and it's unbelievable that these corporations have such power.
Yeah, and we're looking at, so this, again, your comments about healthcare, right? This circles right back to the tax cut that just happened, the tax cut for the rich, right? Which we now, it's going to cost $1.5 trillion. You lowered the corporate tax rate to 21% from 35%. Remember, the 35% tax rate for corporations, which existed until now, so many loopholes, so many carve-outs, so many ways that companies go offshore and avoid it. And of course, they also got rid of this individual mandate. Now, I would argue that this is a classic. It kind of shines a light on what's really wrong with the system. Very often, Democrats and progressives feel the need to defend Obamacare, right? But the Obamacare was actually not a particularly good policy. It was a concession to the pharmaceutical and insurance industries. It was custom built to not offend them too much because it was a boon to them. It was mandatory private insurance. It was not the universal health care that the president or candidate Barack Obama promised on the campaign trail. And so what we're seeing is that, the Democrats are being forced to defend a highly imperfect healthcare bill that really isn't great. But what we saw with the passage of the tax bill is they get rid of the requirement that you have insurance. And now the Congressional Budget Office is estimating that 4 million people will lose health insurance by 2019, and 13 million Americans are going to lose health insurance by 2027, and that premiums will rise by at least 10%. So what happened with this is, like, you see the Republicans are going to force 13 million. I mean, think about it. That's just a number, right? 13 million human beings. 13 million human beings. 4 million in just the next year alone. These are people with lives and with health problems like your mom. And at the same time, the billionaires get richer, the middle class and working families get poorer. And we get to the place where the United States looks more and more like a banana republic. It looks more and more like the many empires that has preceded it, where the inequality of wealth has gotten so extreme that it eventually forces revolution and the end of that empire. And so, it's a quick fix for the GOP and their donors, their special interest cronies, and it's a long-term prescription for ending the democratic experiment as we know it.
I'm so very glad to have spoken with you, Josh, and I encourage all of my listeners to please go to represent.us and join the other powerful voices that are speaking against corruption and corporate greed. Josh, besides represent.us, where can people find you and your organizations online?
Go to unrigsummit.com. Join Jennifer Lawrence and Adam McKay and David O. Russell and others at New Orleans for February 2, 3, and 4 of next year for the biggest democracy conference ever. And you can go to anticorruptionact.org if you're a wonk and you want to look at the kind of policies we're actually changing in cities and states across America, and get involved, become part of the solution, start a volunteer chapter for Represent Us in your own community, and be part of the solution. Join us.
Thank you so much, Josh Silver, for joining us on Friend or Foe. Please definitely check out represent.us and unrigsummit.com. Josh, thank you so much.
Before signing off, I'd very much like to thank my new show producer, Emily Sex, my new editing partners at Ginger Cat Productions, Jessica Kupferman at True Native Media, who will be our sponsorship partner in upcoming episodes, my incredible engineer here at the Nerdist Studios, Aristotle, and as always, the team at Jabberjaw Media. You can follow this show across social at Friend or Faux Pod, that's FAUX, and me, your host, Devlin Wilder, across all the places at my name, DEVLINWILDER. All right, that's it for this episode. See you on the next one.
Thanks.
Guys, this has been Friend or Foe. No one knows.
Visit jabberjawmedia.com for more shows like this one.